Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me as always is Ken. How are you doing, Ken?
Bittersweet day for me, Rory, as it is the last in our season 6 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. But don't worry, we will be back after the academic break if you're listening in real time, and we have got such a wonderful episode for you today. So episode 119, what can you expect? We're going to start off by working with a client who has a parent who has narcissistic tendencies. So interesting topic there. Going into Practice Matters with Rory. Today, Rory, you're going to be speaking about clients that frighten you. That's an interesting area.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that came up recently for someone I was speaking to, and they were saying they were frightened by this client. The client wasn't aggressive or, outwardly frightening, but they felt frightened of them. And it does come up from time to time. And I'm going to be speaking about, what you might want to consider and how you may want to work with that as an outcome of therapy.
Like it. And we're going to be ending episode 119 with a loving topic. We're going to be speaking about humanistic love in the therapy room. But let's start off with that. Clients with a narcissistic parent.
Yes. I mean, through the years, I've met many, many clients whose parents have been so kind of self-involved with themselves and just not connecting at all with the child. The clients feel really vulnerable and unloved, and also spend a lot of time trying to please the parent to no avail at all, because people who are narcissists tend to be very, very self-involved. They tend to be in love with themselves, which is where the term came from. And it can be very, very difficult, certainly for clients who've been in clients' childhoods where they've not been loved, they've not been cherished. I hear through the years of children never been hugged or never been told they're loved or never had their hand held. And you get clients who are really, really isolated. And as a therapist, part of our job is to provide that soil of a different kind and to let them feel it. But sometimes that can be difficult if you've never experienced someone showing you kindness and love. That can be quite frightening for a client.
Definitely. And those early years that when we're developing as babies and as children, we have that natural tendency to look to our primary caregivers for that love, for that recognition. We seek their approval. And if that is cold, if that is stone, it's going to affect how we might be as individuals. So when you're seeing that in a client and traits that you might see in a client that presents that has lived in a home where they've really had to work hard to get any recognition, any love, any warmth coming their way, is they may exhibit that in the natural world. There's a number of ways they could go. They can kind of go into the, well, I'm not lovable, so it doesn't matter, I'm going to shut myself off mode. Or they can go right the other way, where they will be looking and vying for love in every interaction, inappropriate sexual relationships, perhaps. So it can show itself in many ways, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And a hallmark of a narcissistic parent is they're giving a very, very strong message out of I'm okay, you're not okay. And of course, children introject the messages they get. So a consequence of that is that the attachment is passed down. Children absorb attachment theory. We think attachment styles off their parents. And what can happen is you get a lot of clients who may have what's called an avoidant dismissive attachment style, where they've spent so much time having to take care of themselves that it's very, very difficult for them to accept others' help. And that could include the therapist. So we have to be very, very thoughtful of that. And also, I think there's something around making sure that we don't overexpose them to the core conditions. I think for sometimes for people who've been brought up with a narcissistic parent, to have someone who kind of is overly warm can sometimes be quite frightening. because they're not used to it, and it really, really, really scares them. So many years ago, when I worked as a support worker, one of the things I was told was don't overpraise the clients, and I thought, well, that sounds to be a bit off, counterintuitive. But actually, what they were saying was just be very careful that you don't push them away with your enthusiasm or your kindness, because they're just not used to it. And you know, I have to say that I did, and it did happen. People just withdrew because they just weren't used to it. So that was a really good lesson learned, to be thoughtful with a client who's got that kind of attachment style, not to be just to be there for them, but on their own terms, working with the client's frame of reference.
100%. And we started this topic speaking about client with a narcissistic parent that has kind of grown up in that environment. But of course, this extends beyond that. We can take somebody who has grown up in a pretty regular, a vanilla kind of childhood, but goes into a relationship where the partner has those narcissistic tendencies, end up in a marriage, multi-year marriage with someone who is constantly bringing them down, constantly telling them that they are wrong and they're doing everything wrong. And we can see that presenting in our therapy rooms as well. Relationships can be a powerful place. You fall in love, you have that initial attraction, but when that goes wrong and people find themselves stuck in those relationships, unable to break out, and their self-worth dropping and dropping. You may even hear from a parent who says, "My daughter, my son, since they've gone into the marriage, we're losing more and more of them. They're just acting differently." So it's something that presents itself, I guess, more often than we would hope it would. And that narcissism, as you kind of pointed out in the beginning, Rory, it's classed as a borderline personality disorder, narcissism. It is where a person, for them to feel all right, they need to be putting other people down. They think that everything their view of the world, their frame of reference is 100% right, and anything that should dare cross or question their frame of reference is completely wrong, and is kind of destroyed with great power and gusto by the person, because they're trying to hang on to that narcissistic side of themselves. I guess they don't choose to be that way. It is how they are from the road that they have walked, but it can be very damaging for children growing up in a home, or indeed for anybody in a relationship where that is playing out.
Yes, it's true. There's an old saying, you know, that not all narcissists are sociopaths, but all sociopaths are narcissists. And you're absolutely right. It can speak of a bigger difficulty. You might be having a relationship with someone who's a sociopath or a psychopath, and the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath, it's a big debate. But someone who's a psychopath is usually born that way. They think there's a genetic component. Sociopaths are usually developed through very poor childhood experiences and being abused themselves. But narcissism is a key element of that, very self-involved. And as a consequence of that, it can be absolutely devastating if you've got a client who's been a child of someone who's a narcissist, or if you've got someone in a relationship with a narcissist, because the people's self-worth can just very, very quickly disappear. And part of our job as therapists is to support clients find who they are, because the narcissistic person, be it a parent or be it a partner, sucks out every last bit of self-worth, a bit like someone with a Hoover, hoovering about other cleaning devices are available, but sucking away the self-worth until there's nothing left. People are like an empty shell of themselves, and they come into the therapy room and we help them rebuild themselves. And it's a privileged work, and it's long work. It's not something that's done in just a few sessions.
That's what I wanted to jump in on, that the patience is so important here. This is exactly right. This is usually years and years of the person being subjected to this And that's how are you going to recognize it? Well, you'll recognize that person presenting in your therapy room, as you say, Rory, with very, very low to no self-worth, looking at the world as everyone is better than me, I can't get anything right. And I guess in working with that kind of a person, sometimes the tricky area is that they're so conditioned into believing that that is true. In fact, when they come in, it may well be their frame of reference is that is the truth. And changing that frame of reference, working with them, being patient within where they are, it's a commitment. It's a worthwhile commitment, but it definitely needs that patience. And how might you work, Rory, with someone who is coming in and their self-worth is completely crushed? What are the key skills that we would hope to be presenting?
Well, I think you've touched on it. One key skill that's really not taught in counselling courses is patience. And being very, very thoughtful. It could be that clients, they have one session and then they don't come back because the exposure is too strong. And then a few weeks later, they have another session and another session. So not getting frustrated if clients just kind of cancel and then you see them again in a few months' time. And I think the biggest skill is just being, sometimes, allowing yourself just to be with the client and be consistent, because that is actually what is denied them as children or in any relationship with a narcissist. Because what narcissists do is you change the goalposts all the time. So just being consistent. And also, I think one of the biggest skills, certainly for people who've been brought up by narcissistic parents, is that they're not allowed to develop that kind of that self-ego and who they are. And part of developing a self-ego as a granddad of a little lad, I can tell you, is that they just act out. And what they're doing is they're finding their real self. They're finding who they are, that you're giving the client a chance to be a child again, to grow up again. And part of that is you may have a lot of acting out, a lot of projection. And the way to do that is just to absorb it, because when a client does that, they're looking for a reaction. So part of that is a client may very well act out and project onto you. And what they're doing is, like a child would, they're looking for you to interject it and to be the stable adult in the room. And that's the key thing. But as I said, it's not short-term work. And you may well want to see your supervisor on more than a regular basis, because it can be quite emotionally demanding for a therapist.
100%. Lots of CPD out there available as well. It's worth looking into. And we could speak about this topic all day, because it does run deep. And I guess the patience needed for the patience that we would need while working with a client like that, this topic deserves that similar patience, in that we could talk about it all day. It's very well worth looking into deeper, because there's a lot of it about. Very often you'll see from the beginning presentation, sometimes the client may come in not because they chose to come into therapy, but coming in saying, they've told me he's told me I have to come in for therapy now, or she's told me I've had to come into therapy. Very often they've been told that they are so wrong, they are so broken, and they very often speak in external locus of evaluation of how they live their life to not upset or to not do the wrong things. And the patience is in sitting with them, waiting with them in that. And as soon as they say something where there's an ownership of their own feeling or their own self, to focus in on that and pay attention to that, because it is their own feelings and their own self that is ignored in that narcissistic environment. Wow, we could just go on, Rory, but we've got so much amazing content to still bring in this episode 119, and we're going into Practice Matters, where you are going to be speaking about clients that may bring up fear in us, that we see that client and we feel an element, I guess, of fear.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When I was planning this topic, I was drawn to an event in my life where I used to travel. I used to be in sales. I used to travel, and I went to a shop in Blackpool, and I went in and I met someone. Wasn't even dealing with this person. He was just someone who happened to be stood behind the counter of the shop, and I came back and I came out and I was shaking. I was physically shaking. And to this day, I've never really found out what that was about. I can guess. There's obviously, you can't have a podcast episode without me mentioning transference. However, there are times when, and certainly as a supervisor, I've had supervisors that say to me, this person frightens me. And sometimes clients can be scary. The way they present can be scary. And sometimes it can bring stuff up in us. And I think that is an area where we need to look at either ourselves or, as I'll talk about in this section, actually working with the client and kind of reflecting back the kind of persona they're projecting out.
As Practice Matters after this short break.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
A few years ago, I pulled into a petrol station to fill up my car. On the way to pay, I was accosted by a very well-built man who seemed to have an aggressive demeanour. I had observed him talking to other customers who had avoided him and rushed to their vehicles. As I walked to pay for my fuel, he approached me and with his face just a few inches from mine, he asked in a booming and aggressive voice, "Can you give me a lift?" To which I replied, "You're scaring me." To my surprise, he took a step back and said, "I'm not scary." In the conversation that followed, we both learned something valuable. He discovered that others perceived him as threatening, even though that was not his intention. I experienced him as maybe someone who is emotionally troubled, who thought that attack was the best form of defence. You see, he was trying to get to see some relatives in Sheffield by hitchhiking and was getting a bit desperate as it was getting dark. I learned again never to judge a book by its cover, and as a bit of a nod to Carl Rogers, who reminded us, of course, that all behaviour is goal-directed. So how does this relate to client work? Well, sometimes we will meet clients who make us uncomfortable or even scare us. Working with this requires us to ask two fundamental questions. The first is, how real is the risk? Is the client doing or saying anything which may give an indication we are at serious risk? And if so, we do need to put a plan into place to make sure we're safe. The other questions is really about ourselves and how we're experiencing the client. Is there some form of counter-transference going on? That's the process of taking feelings related to the past event or a person in our lives and then projecting them onto another. For example, seeing a client who looks like an abusive former partner may bring up frightening feelings, which then we project onto the client. The other question is the client acting out, testing you to see if, like other people in their life, you too will reject them. And sometimes this happens. Clients will be outwardly aggressive just to see if you'll stick with them and be and follow them on their journey, because it might be that they've had experiences of people just deserting them. The last question is to reflect how emotionally robust you are. Sometimes life events can diminish one's capacity to be resilient in the face of angry or aggressive clients. Sometimes, like the man at the petrol station, just reflecting how you experience a person can be mighty helpful to someone who may be unaware of how they're coming across. It goes without saying that supervision and personal therapy can be constructive when answering any of these questions. And the man at the petrol station, well, we parted on good terms, and nope, I did not offer him a lift as I only live a mile down the road. I sometimes wonder if, had I been en route to Sheffield, would I have taken him? It's a question I've asked myself a few times over the intervening years, and I've never really settled on a definitive answer.
Thank you as always, Rory. And I guess we look upon Practice Matters and wave goodbye to it as we come to the end of season 6. That would be the last Practice Matters, and you stay with us for season 7 because we have a new format that's coming up that we're very excited about, which we will share with you when we go into season 7. But as always, if you want to download Rory's super duper handout, that is available for you free of charge on working with clients who may bring up fear in the counsellor. And where do you get that? Well, you go to our website, which is counsellingtutor.com. That's counselling spelt with 2 L's because we're based in the UK. Counsellingtutor.com. When you get to our website, click on the podcasts tab, go to episode 119. All of the notes are there on that page. We call them our show notes. It's basically what we've talked about today, a little summary of that, including any links to external references for additional reading. And you can download Rory's super duper handout from right within that page. You put in your name, you put in your email address, and there it is for you. And of course, if you are already a member of our paid for part of Counselling Tutor, which is called our Counsellor Resources, well, then you just need to log into your Counsellor Resources because the handout has already been added and the podcast is there for you as well with all the notes accessible from within your Counselor Resources dashboard. So moving into a lovely topic. We're ending on I can see the flowers coming out and I can hear the birds singing and I can see the trees as we mentioned humanistic love.
Yes, it's really interesting that, you know, part of our work is about generating a love of people. And there's a wonderful book written by Erich Fromm called The Art of Loving, 2 M's in Fromm, F-R-O-M-M, Erich Fromm. And he talks about the different forms of love that humans generate. So love of country, love of a brother or a sister, love of parents, a passionate love, love of children. They're all nuanced ways of loving. And in the therapy room, you know, I'm a great believer of showing humanistic love. And a few years ago, I was watching someone do some counselling skills, and it was a brilliant display of skills. I mean, it was very polished, very professional. And I said to the person, that is really, really good. I said, now, how did you feel about the person in front of you? And they went, didn't feel anything really. And I said, that is the area that you need to work on. The skills are pretty much there. I said, but you need to think about what it is that stops you seeing that person, because what we're seeing when we look at our clients, we work with our clients, we're seeing them as spiritual people. I don't mean religious people, spiritual people, human beings who have a wide life, a wide panoply of experiences. Humanistic love is really part of that, seeing the client as an individual. And that really, I think, is humanistic love in a nutshell, accepting that person in front of you as a fellow traveller on the planet.
It's difficult to define it in words, isn't it, Rory? That humanistic love, that it's empathy, it runs deep, it's that unconditional positive regards. I mean, the core conditions kind of name it, but they don't put the feeling to it. And you can layer the skills on top of that, and the skills can come across as cold. And if you think about going to a medical professional, more often than not, in my experience, and I guess it depends on the doctor that you're seeing, you get a very professional service where they have great knowledge and they give you exactly what you need. They may prescribe, they may be nice to you, they may smile to you, but it sometimes feels what we would term as clinical, and clinical is cold and without feeling. And when we're looking at counselling, there is another element to it. Yes, we provide that professional framework. Yes, we are highly trained in what we are delivering and working with the clients, but there is that other element, and you mentioned it as spiritual, and I don't know there is another word for it, Rory, than spiritual, and I get what you said. You don't mean religious or something like that, and spiritual can I guess have a bad name at times because it's not really definable, but there is an energy, there is a caring, and the word is right, love. For the person that is there with you. And that is so powerful because it is felt within the room. You feel it yourself as that is being expressed, and it is felt and received by the client. And the receiving of that love can be so incredibly powerful. In a moment of silence where not a word is spoken, where the client is not speaking, where the counsellor is not speaking, and that can go on easily for 5 minutes in practice without any discomfort, just with this blanket of love, this envelope of love, with the person feeling held within that silence. Those are the special moments of counselling.
Yeah, absolutely can. And I think that the best way to sum it up was by the philosopher Martin Buber, who gave us something called the I-thou relationship. And Carl Rogers had a lot of conversations with Martin Buber, because he was talking about not an I-it relationship. And you hit on that when you're talking about the medical professional who's looking at you as maybe as a machine that needs fixing. That's an I-it relationship. An I-thou relationship is tricky to nail, but it's very, very nuanced. We're separated only by very discrete boundaries. We're seeing the other person as a valuable person, a person of worth. And perhaps Rogers, of all the people, summed it up so eloquently. He talks about therapists producing the soil of a different kind. In other words, that humanistic, that love, the non-judgmental, being empathic, being real in the therapy room as a way of helping the client self-actualize their own, for want of a better word, self-loving.
Yeah. And I guess what makes it so special, what makes it so unique in therapy and so important at the end of the day is the world we live in doesn't foster that. It's not fostered in our day-to-day reactions. It's not encouraged. And do yourself an experiment. Go into your town centre and then start walking up to people and saying, "Can you help me, please?" And see how many people will just turn their back, avert their eyes from you and walk on. That humanistic love, that love and care for fellow human beings is rare. So when it is found in the therapy room, it is so special, so appreciated, and forms that relationship. And I guess when we look to the evidence, to the research, and it suggests that the relationship is what is most important, or what creates the biggest outcome in counselling. And part of that is not the skills we use, it's not the modality that we use, not the words that we say, but it is that invisible humanistic love which is present. And I guess, Rory, you picked this for a very specific reason, because there's an element of humanistic love that we hold to you as our listeners. You know, we are 119 episodes into Counselling Tutor Podcast. We are 6 seasons in. We are still going strong. We're coming up to 750,000 downloads of our podcast, and that is because you choose to lend us your ears, to be here. We've got somebody to speak to. You write into us. You comment on our Facebook group, and if you're not in the Facebook group, get in there. Tens of thousands of like-minded people, and all you need to do is go onto Facebook and put in Counselling Tutor, and we will open the doors warmly. And I think that it's like-minded people who share this humanistic love that we go out and hopefully share with our clients, with one another. And hey, you know, my lifelong goal, Rory, I'll share it. It's my one thing, my big goal in life is that if I can leave this world just a tiny little bit better than when I came into it, then my whole life would have been worthwhile. And just imagine if every single person who ever lived left the world just a little bit better than it was, what a world we would live in today.
Yes, well, what a fantastic end to a podcast. We started off with working with clients who have a narcissistic parent. Then in Practice Matters, I talked about, you know, clients that frighten you. And then we finally talked about love in the therapy room. And I think that as a child of the 60s, you know, listening to music, I'm going to end this by saying all you need is love.
Take care.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.